Hope you've had a chance to see the video that I released on Memorial Day that featured POWs who played in Major League Baseball. One of those POWs was Bert Shepard. Bert is not only in that select group of players who were POWs, but to the best of my knowledge, he's also only one of 2 amputees to have played Major League Baseball, the other being Pete Gray. Today, I'll discuss both these men as well as a special group of amputees who played the game, just not at the Major League level. Bert Shepard was born in Indiana in 1920, and he was quite an athlete growing up. His high school did not have a baseball team, so as a teen, Shepard played briefly with a semi-pro team in his hometown. After his junior year, he hopped a freight train and headed to California, where he found a job at a tire retread plant. He continued to play baseball on Sundays on the local sandlots, and word quickly got around about this left-handed pitcher. In 1939, he signed a minor league contract with the White Sox for $60 a month. He didn't stick around for long, and after being released, he returned to Indiana to finish high school. After graduating, Bert was signed by St. Louis and sent to the California League, then the Arizona, Texas League, and the Wisconsin League. At this time, the U.S. was now fully involved in World War II, and Bert Shepard enlisted in March of 1943. He was sent to Daniel Field, Georgia for flight school, and in early 1944, he arrived in England to join the 55th Fighter Group, flying the Lockheed P-38 Lightning. In March of 1944, he was with the first Allied planes that ever flew over Berlin in the daytime. On May 21 of 1944, Bert volunteered for a high-risk mission over Hamburg, Germany. With very special thanks to Zach Sweeney of the American Veterans Center, I have been given permission to share this video of Bert Shepard telling his account of what happened that day.
Bert Shepard, let me come to you a minute.
Well, I took the Air Force exam. You had to have 2 years of college, but I didn't have that. So I took a spatial exam, which was equal to that. So I got called into cadets and was fortunate enough to graduate and fly a P-38. But an interesting thing, when I was in prison camp, every time a new prisoner came in, everybody'd rush up, say he's from New York. How are the Yankees doing? How is Brooklyn doing? It's amazing the interest baseball had in prison camp. That was the first thing they'd ask them. How's their favorite team doing? Mm-hmm. So that was rather interesting.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about the incident itself.
Well, I was over there flying around. I wasn't bothering anybody, but I saw a column of smoke up ahead, and they said there's some airplanes on there. I said, well, I might as well make a pass on the way back to England. And I was about 2 miles from it, and I must have flown right over the gun emplacement because they must have shot up and they shot the right foot off. So I called the colonel and told him I had a leg shot off. I'd call him back later. Well, hell. So there's no pain or anything. It's just a little numb. And so in the meanwhile, I get hit in the chin. And that knocked me unconscious. A lot of people accuse me of still being unconscious. But no, technically the doctors say that I'm okay. So then I crashed in the airplane unconscious. Hit her kabang. So a German, a Vienna doctor from Austria was in the German Luftwaffe, and he was called to come over to take me to the hospital. And he had to chase the farmers away with their pitchforks because they were going to do me in. And he had a pistol with him, so he chased them away. Well, the local hospital wasn't going to take me because I was a terror flieger. See, there's a lot of fighter aircraft strafed Germans, a bunch of civilians, and that's a pretty dirty thing. So he called a high command in Berlin, and they called the Ludwigshus Hospital and said, you take him, you're responsible. So he took me in there, and I woke up a couple weeks later, and he had already left, and I didn't know who had brought me to the hospital until about 50 years later.
Is that right?
And I was able to fly over to the Parndorf, Austria, and visit with him as the greatest thing that could ever happen to me. Because that had been bothering me. Well, I'm getting a little old, and I might kick the bucket one of these days. So I was anxious to see him. A great thrill. And when I got ready to leave, he put his arms around me and squeezed real hard. And I had the feeling those were the same arms that picked me up out of that cockpit, and I broke down something awful. It was, I didn't expect to, but by God I did.
That's a wonderful tale.
So Bert was shot. I read that he said in another interview he was flying incredibly low, only 10 feet above ground level, if you can believe it. As he said in the video, he would have died had it not been for the brave Luftwaffe doctor who pulled him from the plane and scared off the locals. Bert was unconscious for several days and woke up to find his right leg had been amputated below the knee. That Luftwaffe doctor had disappeared by the time Shepard regained consciousness. After some time in German hospitals, Bert was part of a prisoner exchange that brought him home. After arriving in the U.S., Shepard and other POWs met with Undersecretary of War Robert Patterson at the Pentagon. Bert says, quote, "He asked me what I wanted to do. I told him I wanted to play pro baseball." So Patterson called his friend, Clark Griffith, owner of the Washington Senators, and Shepard was given a tryout. His prosthetic leg barely affected his pitching motion. He was fortunate that it was his right leg, his landing foot, for a left-handed pitcher, and not his left, his pushing leg. And he made the team. His only major league appearance came on August 4, 1945, against the Boston Red Sox. 5 1/3 innings pitched, 1 run on 3 hits with 2 Ks and 1 walk, for a game and a career 1.69 ERA and a WHIP under 1. 1 game, 1 day in August of 1945, but it's still so significant. Think about it. It's been almost 80 years. He's still the only MLB player to play with a prosthetic leg. There's one final amputee who played Major League Baseball. Pete Gray was not a soldier. Pete was born in 1915 in Nanticoke, Pennsylvania, and lost his arm as a 6-year-old kid after a carriage accident when his arm got caught in a wagon wheel. Pete's life story was made into a movie in 1986 called A Winner Never Quits. The complete movie can be seen on YouTube for free. It features Keith Carradine and Ed O'Neill. It's a little cheesy. It felt more like a 1950s movie than a 1980s production, but I have to credit Keith Carradine. Unlike Anthony Perkins playing Jimmy Pearsall in Fear Strikes Out, Carradine actually looks like he can play baseball. He did a really good job. Pete's father worked the coal mines in Pennsylvania, and the boys in the town were expected to leave school at age 13 to join their fathers working in the coal mines for the Lackawanna Railroad. I couldn't find proof that Pete followed his brothers into the mines. It's possible that his missing arm precluded that, but it's also entirely possible that the coal company didn't care that he was missing an arm. This would have been 1928, and I'm sure they'd take all the 13-year-old labor they could get. Pete's older brother helped him learn to play baseball with one arm, and as a kid, he constantly overcame obstacles. As Pete learned the game, hitting proved to be the easiest part. Fielding and throwing were the real challenges. In Pete's words, quote, "I'd catch the ball in my glove and stick it under the stub of my right arm. Then I'd squeeze the ball out of my glove with my arm, and it would roll across my chest and drop to my stomach. The ball would drop right into my hand, and my small, crooked finger prevented it from bouncing away." Just as I covered in the video on Joe Nuxhall, the Great War brought with it an opportunity for many men to play professional baseball that otherwise would have been excluded. Pete knew he had skill and pursued a number of opportunities in baseball where he was routinely outright dismissed just because of his missing arm. In 1940, he attended a tryout in New York with the semi-pro Brooklyn Bushwicks when owner-manager Max Rosner laughed at his request for a tryout. Pete handed him a $10 bill saying, "Keep it if I don't make good." Rosner accepted the offer. Pete played in a game that day and had 2 hits, including a home run. Rosner returned the $10 with an extra $15 to boot. Pete would be paid an impressive $350 per month by Rosner, playing for 2 seasons. A scout for the Three Rivers Quebec Club and Canadian American League noticed Pete and signed him. The stats are sparse, so we don't know his OPS, but we do know he hit an amazing .381 that year before breaking his collarbone sliding into a base. The Canadian League was canceled for 1943, which led to Pete finding his way down to Tennessee to play with the Memphis Chickasaws. He was exceedingly popular in Tennessee. Fans called the ballpark every day wanting to know if Gray would be playing. After his second year in Memphis, where he hit .333 with an OPS of .828, scouts from almost every major league team were following him. In late September, the St. Louis Browns purchased his contract for $20,000. Major league pitchers, unfortunately, were quick to find Pete's Achilles heel, the curveball. After exploiting his weakness, Pete struggled to hit. He was able to adapt, but ended the season hitting only .218 with an OPS of .520 in 1945. By 1946, a lot of major league talent had returned from the war and competition was fierce. Pete was sent down to the Toledo Mud Hens and would never make it back up to the major leagues. Pete has what may be the most subtle Easter egg on Baseball Reference. Bats left, throws left, fields left as well.
Sensation of this year's baseball season is one-armed Pete Gray of the St. Louis Browns. Despite his handicap, Pete asks and gives no favors, standing right up there with the best of them. He played 2 years for Memphis and came to the big leagues on his own merits. His arm was lost when he was 6, but that didn't kill his spirit nor his dreams of making the big leagues. His batting average is good, though most of his hits are singles. Even when he grounds out, he gets the plaudits of the crowd. In left field, he really shines, and base runners are wary of the speed with which he discards his glove and throws to bases. His pluck and determination is an inspiration to all.
The Department of Veteran Affairs says there were over 4,000 amputations of American soldiers in World War I. The Red Cross puts the number slightly higher at 4,400. And according to the National Institutes of Health, there were approximately 15,000 major amputations of Army personnel in World War II. So the country suddenly had thousands and thousands of young men with amputations, and while most companies prioritized putting veterans back to work, many rejected people with disabilities to avoid financial responsibility for their care. Employers' unwillingness to provide accommodations or change inaccessible working conditions locked many amputees out of jobs, or they were hired at reduced wages. The Americans with Disabilities Act would not become law until 1990. Oftentimes, if they were hired, they were LIFO'd, last in, first out. This turned into a cycle where job discrimination left disabled people without the means to really support themselves, forcing them to rely on financial assistance from family members or the government. This would then reinforce beliefs of dependency that fuel disability discrimination. Frustration with demeaning attitudes and discriminatory policies galvanized some charitable organizations to raise awareness, raise money, and push for legislation, which, as we know, would take decades. One such organization is the National Amputation Foundation, established in 1919. The NAF would take 2 baseball teams on a barnstorming tour of sorts. They would play exhibition games as well as take on local teams. The 2 teams of amputees would become known as the Flat Tires and the Broken Wings. The Flat Tires was composed of men who had lost a leg or 2. The Broken Wings were arm amputees. It's important to note that the Flat Tires and Broken Wings actually predate World War II. Information on this before 1942 was difficult to find. The earliest mention I could find was through a newspaper record search where I found an article from the Evening News of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, dated September 11th, 1933. It says, quote, "A game of baseball was recently played at Oakwood Heights, Staten Island, New York, between the Broken Wings and Flat Tires, 2 crack ball clubs of World War veterans who lost either an arm or leg in France. After struggling through 7 innings, the game ended in a tie, 27-27. The World War I era Flat Tires and Broken Wings appeared to have played only in and around Staten Island, as far as I could tell from my research. Here's an article from the Brooklyn Daily Eagle in September of 1938 promoting a game between the Flat Tires and Broken Wings, and it states it is the 7th annual game, so I feel pretty confident in stating 1932 as the start of the series. After World War II, the Flat Tires and Broken Wings, unfortunately, had a much larger pool of available talent. It was the NAF that appears to have organized the 2 teams into basically fundraising venture, traveling to raise money and awareness for disabled veterans. Initially playing at small local fields, the series grew. Movie stars and famous people were helping raise awareness. Here's a newspaper clipping from the Traverse City Record-Eagle of Michigan from July 1948. The image in the newspaper shows Robert Ripley from Ripley's Believe It or Not fame. Also included are Tom Gaffney on the left, captain of the Flat Tires, and Bob Anderson of the Broken Wings on the right. This was before the game in July of 1948 played at the Polo Grounds in New York. The famous cartoon illustrator Al Capp created this poster for the 1949 game. Capp was himself an amputee. He lost his leg at the age of 9 after being run over by a trolley car in Connecticut. And here's an article from August of 1949 whose caption reads, quote, "In a New York game played at the Polo Grounds, leg and arm amputees of the war staged a baseball benefit game witnessed by many prominent fans, including movie actress Elizabeth Scott, center. Shown are Mike Alhanti of the Flat Tires, leg amputees, and Bob Anderson of the Broken Wings, arm amputees." To give further evidence that the series started in 1932, this clipping from the Brooklyn Daily Eagle in July of 1949 touts Bert Shepard pitching for the Flat Tires and states, quote, "For the first time in 17 years, the Broken Wings will be the underdogs against the Flat Tires when the teams take the field tomorrow night at the Polo Grounds in the 17th Annual Amputee Veterans Baseball Game sponsored by the National Amputation Foundation. Winners of 14 out of 16 games played so far, the arm amputees will be on the short end of the odds." It tells me that the series record at this point was 14-2 in favor of the Broken Wings. I'd been trying to find game results and roster information, and it was basically impossible with the tools that I have at my disposal, which is essentially online newspaper record searches. News of the series appears to have even made it up to Canada. Here's an article from the Winnipeg Tribune in July of 1949. The picture quality is awful, but it states that the Broken Wings won the 1949 contest at the Polo Grounds 8-7. I'm sorry to say that despite a lot of effort, I really can't give much more information about these two teams at this time. Usually in one of my videos, I have to decide what to cut, and unfortunately, I'm sharing pretty much everything that I could find. I have nothing to cut because my information is so incomplete. The only results I could find were from these 3 years. 1933 was a tie, 27-27. 1947, the Broken Wings won 21-12. In 1949, the Broken Wings won 8-7. I have been able to find partial rosters of men who played for the Flat Tires and Broken Wings. And through some online searching of obituaries, I was able to locate some surviving family members of some of these players on Facebook. But my attempts to reach out to these family members, they've been ignored. But if a descendant of one of these great men ever sees this video and wants to talk, please email me at the.athlete.archives@gmail.com. I feel that surely a surviving family member has to have stories and, I don't know, something that they could share that could add a lot to this. In any event, I'm going to share the names of the men that I could identify who I know for sure played in the series. I've sorted them alphabetically by last name to help anyone looking for a specific name. Where possible, I also identified the unit that the men served in. And I'd like to add a special note here for catcher Gail Becue of the Flat Tires. For at least one game, he was traded to the Broken Wings in order to have a two-handed catcher and speed up the game. I hope I did these men justice. Again, I'm making a public plea to anyone related to any of the Flat Tires and Broken Wings players. I would love to hear stories you might have. I spent a lot of time trying to find more information, and it's just not out there. There's a lack of written history here, and it genuinely deserves to be documented. I leave you with a question. Do you think it would be more difficult to play baseball with one arm or one leg? Finally, thanks to the men who sacrificed so much. They paid a high price for our freedom.